Welcome back. As you know, I am Eli, the computer guy, here for Silicon Dojo. Silicon Dojo, authorityless, gatekeeperless, free to end user, hands-on technology education that empowers you to do whatever the hell it is you want to do here in Asheville, North Carolina. I will remind you, when we say free to the end user, it doesn't mean all of this is actually able to be done for free. We work for tips. That's what helps pay for everything, the in-person education and for this video that you're watching. So if you are able and you think this type of content is valuable, think about clicking on the donor box link down below and throwing a few dollars in. So today's seminar is Django Introduction. So I just did this seminar here in Asheville, North Carolina for an in-person event. And basically I figure since I already have the keynote presentation anyway, I might as well just record it so that people can watch this wherever they are around the world on YouTube or whatever other video player that they decide to watch it on. Now Django, what this is this is a web application framework for Python. So Python is a scripted programming language. Python is the programming language that we're basically using as our default standard language here at Silicon Dojo, because you can use Python to solve any number of tasks. You can use it to create robots using Raspberry Pis. You can use it to control microcontrollers with the Pi Pico microcontrollers. You can use it to create mobile applications, and one of the cool things you can do is you can actually use it to create web applications in order to create, whatever kind of site or application that you're looking to do. So Django is a very useful framework, a very powerful framework that uses Python in order to create web apps. Now, when we're talking about a web application, this is basically what we're talking about. So if you followed along with me on social media, you know I have been creating a social media platform for people who talk to themselves, right? Basically, my idea is, hey, what if we had a note-taking app where people could basically take notes on whatever it is that they were interested in, and then essentially other people could eavesdrop on the notes that other people are writing, right? Again, you look at Facebook, you look at so many of the social media platforms out there, and it's all about you talking to the world. Again, I'm an ASPE, so I look at my own lived experiences and my own requirements, and I'm like, I don't really want to talk to the world. The world kind of scares me. I just kind of sort of want to talk to myself. And so I've created this little note-taking app, and I've created this all in Django. Just to give you an idea, right, if I click on links, so I click on the tag cloud here, it shows me all of the tags that have been created and the count. If I click on home, we see all of the different notes that have been created. Basically, this is simply being shown to me using Firefox. Oops. So we're at 127.0.0.1, so that is the loopback address for this particular server, and basically we're able to take a look at this. So email settings for Django was created by me a month ago. Here's some information for how to do the email settings for a Django platform. I also have tags down here. I can click on the tag, so if I want to see all the notes with a Django in the tag, I can click on this. I can follow the Django tag if I want to. So I'm now following it. I can take a look, and these are all the notes that basically have Django as a tag. And so when we're talking about a web app, this is the type of thing that we're talking about. And again, it can be very powerful because you can create a platform like this from scratch to solve whatever your particular problems are. Now here's going to be a warning for you. If you decide to go out and you decide to self-study to learn Django, I'm going to warn you that the study material sucks. It is dog crap. When I say that the self-study material for Django is dog crap, imagine your dog took a crap, your dog then ate that crap, and then vomited that crap back up, and that is basically the state of the self-study material for trying to learn Django. It is an absolute crap show. I will tell you this though, Django is an amazing framework. Once you get to understand how Django works, it actually becomes relatively easy to use. But initially when you go and you start looking at the tutorials, it is very easy to get very confused quickly, right? So when I started learning Django, I actually used the tutorial off of Django's website. I crap you not, on lesson 2, they had you interacting with the database, creating multiple tables, a foreign key from one table, associated with a different table, and basically if you messed any of that up, every other step in the lessons basically would not function, would not work. And so one of the big problems you may have when you go to learn Django is sometimes the self-study material basically assumes that you understand more than you necessarily do. Django is a little bit complicated. It's not obvious from the get-go how to do things. So if you start learning Django and you get confused, simply realize, yes, the self-study material is kind of crap, so it's not you. You can learn it, it's just probably the material. This is one of the reasons that we are going to be having an 8-hour Django class in the future, and in that 8-hour class, we're actually going to go through every single step for how to build a Django app. You're actually going to create a demonstration Django apps for yourself to see how easy it is to use. But again, just realize, when I say that the self-study material is bad, that is not an over-exaggeration. So what is Django? So again, Django is a web application framework for Python. What this means is you can create a web application just like that note-taking app that I showed you. The cool part with Django is that more or less everything is included. Basically, you install Django using something called pip, and when you do, you get the web server, you get the database that you're going to be interacting with, and essentially you can spin everything up from what you install with Django initially. Though I will warn you with this, and we'll talk about this in a few slides down the pike, it's one of those things where everything's included, sort of. Right, you get a database that you can use from day one, but you're going to be using something called SQLite that may be good for you, may actually solve all of your problems, or may not. So you may actually have to learn how to configure MySQL or MongoDB or some kind of AWS database server, that type of thing, to make Django work. The other thing is that a web server is built into Django. So what I was just showing you is actually presented by the Django web server. But again, as I'll show you in another slide, Django, the Django Foundation or whatever, literally states that they are not in the web server business. So it exists, but they would highly recommend that you do not use it for a production environment. So that's one of the things where Django can get a little confusing. Once you understand how it works, you can get something up and running very quickly, but then to take it from that test lab environment and then actually put it into production, there can be a few very confusing steps that can be a royal pain in the butt. When we look at Django, Django was initially started in 2003. Basically, it was created in order to create a website for a newspaper back then, and it was made public back in 2005. When you say, okay, Django sounds cool and all, but is this really used in the real world? Instagram uses Django, Pinterest uses Django, Spotify uses Django, and Eventbrite use Django. Those are 4 of the companies that currently use Django. So when we talk about this being able to be used in a production environment and being able to scale, I mean, unless you're planning to get bigger than Instagram, you should be okay. And Django is going to be the default web application framework for Silicon Dojo. The reason is, as I'll talk about in future slides, is they have a user account system that's already built into Django. So if you want to create a web application and have a basic user account system, it is already there. Security systems are already built into Django. Basically, Django makes it very easy for you to spin up a fairly robust, fairly secure web application and not have to worry about, inserting too many stupid problems into it. So when we talk about Django, this is what we're talking about. Now, one of the big things with Django, especially with new coders, is all of the security that is built into Django by default. One of the big problems you run into in the web app development world is people are not thinking about SQL injection attacks, or they're not thinking about particular security problems that may come up with their web application. They deploy their web application out to the wider world. Hackers, start attacking their application, and everything kind of goes to hell. One of the nice things with Django is they have a lot of built-in security to hopefully prevent your site from being attacked or compromised. One of the big things with Django is you do not have a root level HTML directory, right? So what this means is when you create an application with PHP or Ruby on Rails or something like that, and you install Apache or Nginx as a web server on your server, you are going to have a root directory, and that root directory is going to have all of the files, all of the scripts, all of the images, basically everything required to make your web application run. The issue there is if you screw up on security, basically somebody might be able to compromise that folder from the outside world, and then they might have access to literally everything within that folder. The cool thing with Django is basically you run the server and you actually put all of your scripts, all of your files into a non-root directory. So you can set this up in your own home user directory or some other secure directory. And when somebody comes to your website, Python reads from that directory, creates the files on the fly, and then sends that to the user. So at no point is that user actually able to access the files in your root directory. So generally, it should make it a lot more secure. There's built-in template sanitization. So this is one of the big things. So we're going to talk about this in a second. But there's a number of different files when you're dealing with Django. The final web page that you're going to see is going to be presented to you using something called a template file. So information is sent from something called the views file to the template file. The template file takes the information, formats it, and spits it out to the web browser. The good part with this is that template file is going to, or Django through that template file is going to go through and it's going to clean out any possible security problems that you may have with the information that's going to be presented to the end user. So anything that might be like a SQL injection attack, anything that might be unclosed HTML tags or other types of tags, that will be eliminated through the template. So that'll be a nice thing. Cross-site scripting protection. So you've heard of cross-site scripting. So basically a script is actually sitting on a different server. It's somehow called from your particular server. With Django, it protects from that. Cross-site request forgery protection. So this is kind of interesting. Basically, the idea being is if you have a form that posts to a script on your server, somebody could try to create a form on an entirely different server and try to start posting information to your server using that form if they understand a little bit about how your server works. So with this cross-site request forgery protection, that basically prevents it from happening. There's these little tokens you have to install, you put on all of your forms on Django, and basically if your form doesn't have one of those tokens, the information will not be processed by the Django server. So that's nice. SQL injection protection, again, that's a nice thing. And then something called clickjacking protection. So sometimes, again, hackers and nefarious actors will try to add clickable links into things on your particular website if you have a bulletin board service or something like that. And so it'll try to prevent the click jacking there to try to keep your people more secure. So one of the nice things with Django is this is all built in from the get-go. So if you're worried about security, you can start worrying about higher level concepts, and a lot of this basic stuff will simply be done as soon as you install Django on your server. Now, one of the great built-in pieces of functionality with Django is you get GUI admin panels, right? So if you're used to using something like cPanel, any kind of graphical user interface web panel for some kind of back-end administration system that you're currently using, one of the nice things with Django is that this is already built in. So this is the Django administration dashboard from that platform that I just showed you, my little note-taking app. You can see up here that we already have users and groups. Those are installed by default on the Django server. And then we can see down here, these are tables within my database. So I have a notes table in my database. I can click on this notes table. Basically, this is going to show me information that I've coded in something called the models file. We'll show that to you in a second. Basically, these are all the records in my notes table, and I can click on one of these records and it shows me the title for this record, the memo for this record, the URL, the owner, the tags, and the status. So from here I can do something like delete this particular record, or I can modify or edit this particular record within this GUI interface, without having to know a lot of code. So this can be very useful in the sysadministration world, where you sit down, you code out something very complicated, very sophisticated, but the person that you're going to be handing this over that's going to have to do basic day-to-day administrative tasks, they can just come to this particular dashboard to do something, again, like delete a record or add a record, something like that. We click on this, we can see the user accounts. So again, this shows us user accounts. I can click on a user account. It shows me a bunch of different information here, along with permissions on the Django server. So what's really great about Django is this is all built in. You don't really have to do a lot of configurations. You get this from the moment that you install Django. The next thing that makes Django a really great web application framework is you have a user account system already built in. So it's built in, again, when you install Django onto your server. From that point, you're able to create user accounts, and with those user accounts, they have passwords, and you can start coding to give people permissions to do certain things with whatever components are within your application. The other thing that's nice is that the user account system is extendable. So there are basic columns, basic fields for information for the user account, but then you can add additional things, like if you want to add a longer profile to ask for things such as social media accounts or a biography or a link off to an image file somewhere for their avatar. All of that, it can be done using Django's user account system. So as I was just showing you before, right, we have users and groups here. So much like, any kind of server that you'd be dealing with, you can click on groups. So basically you can create a group and add users to that group. If we go over and we click on the add group, you can then see we can create a name for the group. And then there are all of these different permissions you can give to particular users, right? So if you want to come up with a very sophisticated web app system with a lot of security policies in here, you can have these group permissions just like you would in a normal server. Can view a note, can delete a note, can change a profile, can change a session, can add a session, right? You go through and I don't know, there must be 100 different permissions here that you can go through and tweak and adjust. If we go over here to take a look at the user accounts, this might be something that would be valuable for your particular environment. Again, if you're going to have some kind of platform where you're going to have 100, 200, 1,000 users interacting with your platform, and you're going to need some sysadmin to be able to go in, change user names, change passwords, that type of thing, having an interface like this can be very useful. So as you see, I don't know, I can click on Eli here. So this is me. Basically, we can see that what the username is. We can see the hash, at least for the password. We have a first name. We have a last name. We have an email address, permissions. So this shows that it's active. So it can be active. You can be staff. You can be a super user. You can be added to a group. You can add specific permissions to this particular user. It shows you the last login, and it shows you the date joined. So this is all, again, within this dashboard that's just created by default with Django. And so this can be very useful in order to give your web application user accounts without having to do a lot of coding yourself. Now let's talk about the database that's installed by default when you install Django. So when you install Django, one of the things that's going to happen is SQLite is going to be installed, and this is going to be your default database engine that you can use for your web application. One of the nice things about SQLite is this is completely portable. So basically you can take your database, you can essentially pick it up, you can copy, and you can paste it, and you can dump it somewhere else. So that's a good thing. When you see SQLite, though, you might be thinking, well, Well, a light database, that's fine for other people, but I'm gonna need a real database. Now, before you dismiss SQLite and think it's not gonna be for you, just realize the max database size for SQLite theoretically can get up to 281 terabytes in size. That's your database, not your server, your database. So, most people are not going to go anywhere near 281 terabytes in size. Beyond that, the max row size can be 1 gigabyte. So one record, a row, can be 1 gig in size. I'm not actually sure what the hell you're doing when you get one record. That's 1 gig in size. But again, unless you have to worry about hitting that particular size limit, SQLite is probably going to be fine for you. It's the most widely deployed and used database engine. Apparently every Android device, every iPhone, iOS device, Mac, Windows 10, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Skype, iTunes, Dropbox, TurboTax, QuickBooks, obviously PHP, Python, lots of smart TVs and that type of thing actually use SQLite. And SQLite is basically designed as this database system, basically for portable devices. If you have a smartphone, it's going to need a database in there in order to store certain records and that type of thing, and SQLite will work fine. For your Django application, again, you're going to need to be able to store records, be able to do selects and inserts and all of that type of thing. You may want it to be portable, and so SQLite is most likely going to be fine for you. So a lot of people, when you look at SQLite, the thing that you're going to think about is, oh, it's light, it's small, it's weak. That's why I don't want to use it. Realistically, if you're just going to use a single database, you're not going to do replication strategies. You're not going to do like a complicated architecture. SQLite is probably going to be fine for you. Where you may want to change, again, do MySQL, Postgres, MongoDB, one of the AWS databases or something like that, is when you actually start thinking about architecting your database infrastructure. And so what I mean by that is where you have multiple database servers. Those database servers are going to be replicating to each other. There are going to be some read servers, some write servers, a master server, right? If those words I just used don't really mean anything to you, then SQLite's probably going to be fine, right? So this is just kind of one of those things to think about, is that SQLite is powerful enough for you. The main concern is whether or not you need to architect your database infrastructure, and so that would be a reason for going with some other type of database. Or, again, if your company is using a different type of database, that might be a reason to use something other than SQLite. So the built-in web server within Django. This is a lovely thing because basically as soon as you install Django, you get the built-in web server. You're able to run the web server. So Python or Python 3, manage, run server. That will turn the server on and it'll turn it on at port 8080, right? So you'll go to 127.0.0.1:8080 and then you should be able to see your website or your web application as it is once you're running the server. If you want to run at port 80 itself, so this is the standard HTTP port, you would actually do sudo first, so super user do, and then Python manage run server, and then 0.0.0.0:80. Basically the reason you have to use sudo first is because in order to run something on port 80 itself, you need administrative permissions in order to do that. And so basically this is what I normally run just to make my life easy. I don't have to, remember or screw around with port numbers. I can simply go to 127.0.0.1. Port 80 is the default, so we don't have to worry about ports, right? So that's how you're going to run your web server when you're in that lab environment. It is not good for production. It's not good for production. And when I say it's not good for production, Django, the company itself, tells you it's not good for production. This is actually a clip from the Django website. Do not use this server in a production setting. It has not gone through security audits or performance tests, and that's how it's gonna stay. We're in the business of making web frameworks, not web servers, so improving the server to be able to handle a production environment is outside the scope of Django. So the important thing to understand here when Django says this is it's not like, well, we're not putting 100% of our resources into the web server. They're not saying, well, we have a good web server, but maybe other people have better web servers. Basically what they're telling you is we are giving you exactly what you need to run Django in a lab environment, and if you're going to put this into production, use somebody else's web server. Do not use the one that comes built into Django. So when I've deployed this in the real world, use something called Gunicorn, G-U-N-I-C-O-R-N. That's a web server that you can use for Python or for Django applications. And that's one of the things we'll go into a little bit later, but it gets very confusing, and we'll really focus that when we do the 8-hour class. Oh boy, now we get to do the slide that the newbie trolls on YouTube are just gonna have a field day with, right? So as I've been learning Django, as I've been playing with Django, one of the things I've talked about on social media is that I find this whole MVC model very interesting. It's something called a model view controller model of how to create web applications, and it wasn't something I was used to before I started playing with Django. And then some people on social media were like, Eli, why are you calling it MVC? It's actually an MVT model, a model view template model. At which point, as I tell everybody, this is when you just walk away from people very, very, very slowly. Again, as I will say, do not get into arguments with programmers. It's not worth your time. It's not worth your time. It's not worth your energy. You go, yes, I'm using Django, and I like the MVC model. And a programmer says, it's not MVC, it's MVT. And you go, oh, okay. The appropriate response in programmer arguments is okay. And then you walk away. So I actually got this as a screen capture from a Django's website, and I like it, because basically they try to spell out what they're talking about here. So Django appears to be an MVC framework, but you call the controller the view, and the view the template. How come you don't use the standard names, right? This is what a real programmer will hammer you with. And what Django says is, well, the standard names are debatable. And this is an important thing, again, especially for new people in the tech industry, right? We use so many words, and we use so many names, and many times we don't use the right words, and many times we don't use the right names, and many times we don't agree on what the names and the words actually mean. But because we are computer professionals, people think that we are perfect. So I think this is probably like one of the best lessons you'll get out of any computer training course. Standard names are debatable. Again, this is coming from Django itself. If you're hungry for acronyms, you might say that Django is an MVT framework, that is model template view. That breakdown makes much more sense. At the end of the day, it comes down to getting stuff done, and regardless of how things are named, Django gets stuff done in a way that's most logical to us. So, is it MVC? Is it MVT? Again, who the hell really cares at the end of the day? The big thing is actually going to be building a web application. So, kind of some trivia to keep in mind. And again, if you get hammered by any quote-unquote real programmer out there, just nod at them and say okay, and then walk away very slowly. So let's talk about the MVC model for a moment. Again, the model view controller, or really, let's kind of talk about how Django normally works, right? So if you normally have a web server, right? So you normally have your web server here, you have Linux installed on the web server, you have Apache installed on the web server, you're going to have your PHP script. Basically, you will have a file called index.say.php. When somebody comes to your website, they will just get automatically directed to this particular file. Then if you're connecting to a database or a data store, basically this file will then point to your database or to your file store or whatever else. And this is basically what like a standard like PHP web application looks like. The important thing to understand is in the Django world, And that's not how it looks. That's not how it looks. So the first thing that's going to happen in the Django world, right? So you have your server, and then you are going to have something called the URLs file. So the URLs file, this contains all of the URLs, the names up in the web browser that people are going to be using to get to different files, or basically get to different web pages within your particular web app. In here, it'll have a root, it'll have, whatever else, contacts or something. It will have different URLs, and here, basically what it will do is it'll direct to something called the views file, where essentially all of the intelligence is. So from the URLs file, you then have the views file. In the views file, you're going to have functions. So define, function, whatever else. In these functions, you are going to collect data from the database. You're going to collect data possibly from APIs. You are going to transform the data in whatever ways you want to transform the data. And basically what the views file does is with Python, so with the standard Python programming language, you're going to collect all of this data. You're going to transform the data into whatever format you want it to be. And then you're going to send that data to a template file. So there's going to be a folder with these different templates. With these templates, they're going to have different file names. template.html, template2.html, or whatever else. Basically, within there is a template language. The information coming from the views file is going to be sent to one of these templates. Using the template language, basically all of that data is going to be written out into a web page that you will be able, or the user will be able to understand and will be able to interact with, right? And so this is how it works. You do not have like a .php web page or a standard .html web page like you might be used to for creating web applications, right? So basically, you're going to go from the URLs file. That's going to send you to the views file, where essentially all the intelligence is done. All of the information there is going to be sent to the template that you assign when you're in the views file, and then the template is then going to write out all of the information for the web page that the user is going to be interacting with. So this is basically how Django works when you're thinking about how somebody is using it. So installing Django and initially setting up a Django application is relatively easy, right? So you're going to have Python. You're going to have Python 3 installed onto your server. You're going to have pip. So pip is the package installer that you're using to install packages into your Python environment. And so you're going to say pip install Django. And that will install Django. So basically how you install any kind of module into Python is how you're going to install Django. Once Django is installed, you're going to go to whatever directory you want to be the root directory for your application. This may be your user home folder, or wherever the hell you want to put it. Again, an important thing to understand in the Django world is it doesn't matter where it is, right? If you're using Apache or Nginx in order to deliver PHP or HTML web pages, you have to be in the root directory for HTML, right? The important thing to understand with Django is you don't. You can literally put these files basically anywhere you want within your file directory, though you probably should be saying about it again, put it into your home directory or whatever else. In order to create the application, you simply type in Django admin, start project, and then my site. And so my site is going to be the name of the web application that you're creating. When you do that, basically Django is going to automatically create a bunch of files and folders, the URLs file that we're talking about up here, the settings file, a whole bunch of these different files, and from there you'll be able to start modifying your web application and creating what you want. One of the things that I'll warn you though is, again, Django is weird. Django is weird. I'm going to tell you something. I think the creators of Django might be a little bit, maybe just a tiny bit passive aggressive. I'm just saying, because some of the stuff with the Django world doesn't make sense. Some of it is so easy. It's so easy. and then you run into weird problems, right? So we'll talk about this in another slide down the way. But like if you have to create something like custom filters, so custom filters are in that template file that you create. Basically, you can modify the data that gets sent to the template file using something called filters, and you're actually able to create your own custom filters. One of the weird things, though, is there is a folder. You have to have a folder with a specific name for your custom filters. And what's weird is that's not automatically created when you install Django. So almost everybody's going to create custom filters, and for some reason the custom filter file isn't created. So when you go to learn about creating custom filters, it's going to say, go to this directory, and that directory is not going to exist, and then they're going to be wondering, what the hell's going on? Well, for whatever reason, they don't install that by default. Again, too, like with registrations, when you create the user account, forms. So there are user account forms that are created by default when you install Django. So create a user, log in, log out, all that kind of thing. Well, if you want to modify those, customize those so they have the look and feel of your web application, you can do that. But there's a registration folder that you have to create within the templates folder. Like, why is that not automatically created? Who knows? Because they're passive aggressive. So that's just one of those things. Just keep in mind, like you're going to get this whole directory tree here, and most of the stuff that you're going to need is going to be in that directory tree. But every once in a while, if you're doing a search for how to do something and you can't figure out how to do it, with a directory or whatever else, you may actually have to create that directory and do a few steps before you can get to the task that you actually want to accomplish. So once we've installed Django, the first file I want to talk about is the settings file. So before we get to the URLs and the models and the templates and all that kind of stuff, the first thing that you're going to have is the settings file. And the settings file is the basic configuration file where you're going to insert a lot of settings for basically things like if you're going to connect to an email server, if you're going to do stuff like that. So here is the settings file for that little note-taking application that I've been showing you throughout this particular seminar, right? So basically it's settings.py. You open it up, Django settings for the Note app project generated by blase. We have a base directory here. So one of the things, again, do remember with all of this is Python. So many times you have to add modules. Again, remember in the Python world, in order to do almost anything, you're going to have to add a module to your script, and so that's true even in the settings, even to the settings file. So from path lab import path. Again, one of those things. We have a base directory. We have a secret key. Don't copy and paste that, please. We have the security, so debug equals true. This is going to be a big setting. If you put this into the production environment, turn off the debug settings, obviously. One of the big things, is here, this installed apps. This is something that may mess you up. So this has the administrative system. That's an installed app. It has the authentication system as an installed app. But one of the big things is that you're going to have to set up or configure the app that you've created to work within settings. So I've created this app called Notes, and so at the end of the installed apps, I actually have to add notes in order to have this application work. Again, it's one of those weird things about the Django world, but it's just true. So once you've created your app, whatever you're creating, make sure to add that to the installed apps file configuration. We have some middleware stuff here that you may or may not mess with depending on what you're doing. We have where the templates folder is, database. So this is the database configuration. So if you're going to be changing to MySQL or Postgres or whatever else, you may modify this in here. Then we can come down. We have things such as the time zone, the language code, that type of thing. Different types of settings that you may have to add to your particular settings file is something like the login redirect URL. So I actually had to add this when I initially set up user accounts and people would log in. They would just kind of get dumped into a nowhereville. that wasn't useful. Or when people logged out, again, they would just get logged out and kind of just dumped into Nowhereville. So these are two settings I actually had to add so that when somebody is logged in, when they log in, they get dumped into the list notes, basically that list of notes that I showed you. And when they log out, they also get dumped there, right? And that's the type of thing that you have to add to settings. And then down here, I've configured this particular app to use Send in Blue is an email service, basically a mass email platform, kind of like SendGrid, only they give you more free emails to send every day. You get 300 emails you can send every day instead of 200. Anyways, this is the configuration for that email backend, SMTP relay, true, host name, and of course the password that I deleted from there. But anyways, this is what the settings file looks like, and there's a lot of these small, teeny tiny settings in Django that will make you lose your mind, right? If you do not add your own app into the installed apps configuration, your app won't work. Again, when you configure log in and log out, you have to do that here. Email settings, that type of stuff is done within settings. So if you're having a problem with your web application, it may simply be you just need to add a single line of code to your settings file to make your application work properly. So now we've installed Django. We've created our web application. We've configured a couple settings within the settings file. Now the first thing that we need to take a look at is that URLs file. So this is how our users will be directed when they go to different pages within our web application. So this is a URLs file for the note-taking platform we've been taking a look at. Again, at the top of it, do see that there are modules that you have to import for this particular Python script. So from Django's.urls, we import path, and from period, import view. So we do have to import these particular modules. Then under here, we have URL patterns, and these are all the different pages I have on my relatively small, uncomplicated web application, right? So if we have a path of just /, so essentially root directory, or a path of nothing, what this says is go to the views file, so you could have different file names here, so views file, period, and then the function within the views file. So go to views file, list note, and basically it'll print everything out. If you just do 127.0.0.1 or just the website, you're going to go to that list note. If you put in 127.0.0.1 // it'll take you to the same place. If you want to go to an individual note, basically it'll be note / that will take you to views period note. So note is a different function. When we talk about the functions, I'll show you this when we go to that views file. These functions are what Python uses to go out, grab information, format that information into something that the template file can use, and send the information off to the template file. We have a note edit here, a list notes, list tag cloud, the whole 9 yards. One of the interesting things that you can do with this path is you can actually add variable values here. So string query, so search tags. So I have a place where you can actually do a search for tags or that type of thing. And basically what we can do here is we can put that query into the path, and then when it's picked up by the view, it will grab that query and use it for whatever that the Python script needs you to do. So here we can see string tag. So basically it's a variable value named tag, which is a string, and string author, a variable value for the variable author, and that can actually be sent through this path in the URLs file. And again, views.signupView, views.logoutView, views.profile, so on and so forth. So the user types into their web browser, or possibly they click on a hyperlink, and basically that creates a URL. Django then uses that URL to look at the URLs file. It basically compares that with all the different paths in the URLs file. It looks for the file that it's supposed to go to. So generally the views file, it looks at period, and then it looks for the function that that particular path is supposed to look for within the views file, and it will then redirect the user to that particular function, and basically that function will process to grab the information that's required to present something to the end user. So this is the views file for this little note-taking app that we've been taking a look at. Again, you will notice at the top of the views file, there are a whole metric crap ton of modules that have to be imported depending on what you're trying to do with your particular web application. Again, remember, in the Python world, darn near anything that you're going to do is going to require you to import a module. So just kind of keep that in mind. If something is failing to function with your particular web app, it may very well be that you simply have not imported the proper module to make your function work properly. If we scroll down, we can take a look at this particular function. So the list note function I showed you before, basically this is the default page that somebody would be going to. So it's either 127.0.0.1 and that's it, or 127.0.0.1 with /, right? That will send you to the views file that will then send you to the list note function in the views file. And so this is the function. When we come here, we're going to create a variable called notes, and this variable is basically going to be a query against the database. So I'll show this to you in a second, but we have the SQLite database. In the SQLite database, we have a table called note. So notes is going to equal note period objects all, so everything within that notes table, the values, so all of the fields within that particular record, and then we're going to order by basically ascending, so the latest note first, going down to the oldest note. So this is where we're going to query the database table, collect all of that information into a query set, and that value will be in the notes function. We are then going to create a template variable. So again, as I've talked about before, the views file is what gathers the information, and they send that, and then it then sends it to a template. You have to tell it what template it's going to go to. So template equals loader.getTemplate, and then note-list.html. This is the template file that all of this data is going to be sent to. We have some functions in here I'm not going to get into, but a following equals a widget following function, a following tags equals a widget following tags function. So this gets information that's going to be sent out. And then we have this down here, which is the context. So the context is going to be the data that is getting sent to the template. So we have notes. So a notes variable, this is what's getting sent to the template, is going to equal the value of notes up here. The widget underscore following is going to equal the value of following, where we got information here from this particular function, and the widget following tags is going to come from following tags, which came from this function here. So these are the variables within this function. We are assigning the values of these variables to these template variables here, and this is going to get what's going to get sent to that template file. Then we actually have to send the information to the template file. So here we do HTTP response template. So the template value we had here, render context with request. And so basically what this is going to do is it's going to send the data that we collected here in this particular function and send it to the template file where it will render out there. If we scroll down, we can see that there's just a whole bunch of different functions here, and they can get very complicated. So as you'll notice, this is all pretty standard Python, for X and note takers get, and do this if else. And again, we create a dictionary here, we strip, we do a lot of different things. So you can do a lot of modification, you can do a lot of transformation here within these functions. And this is where all of that intelligence should occur. So one of the important things to understand in the Django world is, in order to try to make the Django web application secure, so you don't have too many vulnerabilities, you have to think about what file is supposed to do what. And so the template file is more or less only supposed to render the data. It's supposed to make the data pretty. It's supposed to make it pretty. It's not supposed to do very much else. The intelligence should be in this views file, and this is where you go and you collect information and you transform information and you send and you do whatever you're trying to do. And that's going to be sitting here in this views file. So once you've collected the information from the views file and you've sent it to the template is where everything is going to be rendered out for the end user so that they can actually interact with your web application. An important thing to understand with the templates is that there is actually a template language. So when you're dealing with the URLs file, when you're dealing with the views file, you're dealing with Python. The Python that you know or the Python that you're trying to learn, the Python is the Python is the Python. The for loops are the same, the if-else's are the same, basically everything is same. It's just a standard Python within like the views file. When you get to the templates file, we then get to the template language that is quite a bit different than Python. It's not horrible. I mean, you can use it. It's no more difficult than HTML, but it's kind of one of those things. Like the first time you learned HTML, it was a bit of a pain in the butt to learn the first time, and so that's kind of one of the things you're going to run into with learning the template language. Within the template language, there are filters. So what filters are is when you send the variable values to the template, you can transform them. You can do a couple of like low-level simple things, and that's what you can do with filters. There are tags. So tags are basically how you call certain functions within the template. I'll show you that in a second. And then you can have nested templates. So basically with nested templates, what you can have is you can have a grandfather template, then a father template, then the normal template, then a child template, then a grandchild template, and so on and so forth. And so you can actually layer. So think about this, like, so you can have a header, and then under the header, you can have, a normal web page that's going to be under that, and then possibly under that, you could have a footer, something along those lines. And so you're able to layer the different templates in that fashion. It is important to understand it's not quite like an include. So like in the PHP world, you can just include stuff. You just include a header, include the page, include the footer, include all the kinds of different stuff that you want, right? It's important to understand within Django, you can do an include. They actually have the ability to do an include within the template, but you can only include static HTML. So any of that kind of intelligence that's done in the views file, you cannot do that with an include on the template. It just doesn't work. Standard HTML, static HTML works fine. If you're going to be hitting the views file, you basically have to layer the templates. So that's an important thing to understand. And then also, you can't have brother and sister templates, right? It's basically, it stacks down. So you have the grandfather, the father, the son, the grandson. It goes down in that fashion. You can't have templates that kind of come from the side or lateral, if that makes any sense. And that's one of the things that can be a little bit confusing. We're trying to build a web page using these templates it gets a bit frustrating that you can't basically just include a widget very easily, that type of thing. Okay, so this is the views file, as we're looking at before. So this is the function for list note. From here, we're going to get the template, and the template that we're going to get is note-list.html. So this right here is the template that we are going to be getting. Now, one of the things you'll notice up here is this says extends main.html. So basically main.html is the top basically template that we're going to use, and we're going to use that for the things that are essentially at the top of the page, right? So if we look at our thing here, basically that main.html, it's going to be these links, home, tag cloud, note takers, new note, profile, log out, that type of thing. The search, this is all going to be basically like a top widget up there. If we go and we take a look at this, If we go to main, right, so main, what it gets extended from, so we see that we open up with the HTML, we open up with the body, we have the home link here, we have the tag cloud link here, we have the note takers link here, we have the new note there. This is where we start to see the template language, right? So we see squiggle, %, if user period is authenticated, then print out new note. So basically, if a user is authenticated, they can there will be a link that says new note, and so they'll be able to click on that new note link to be able to add a new note to the system. One of the big things that gets a little confusing with this whole template language is you have to close everything. Basically, like HTML, where you open an HTML tag and you close an HTML tag, within the Django template language, if you open up an if, you have to close the if. So we have the squiggly bracket, %, end if. We open the if here, we close the if there. So if user is authenticated, we come down here, user, and this is where we can call variable values. So squiggle bracket, user.username. So the person that's currently logged in, that will get printed out, right? So what we're doing here is user is etcg admin. So I'm logged in as etcg admin, and so it's printing that information out. So if the user is authenticated, which I am, print out the username, and so it prints out the value of that username. And then we have the links for the profile, we have the links for log out, so on and so forth. If we come down here, we then see else. So if user is authenticated, show these links. Else, user is not authenticated, show these different links, and then you have to end the if. We come down here to that search form. So I showed you here, we have this search form right here. And so basically we have what looks like a pretty standard HTML form, span, search text, post, the whole 9 yards. What you'll see here is a CSRF token. So this is that security to keep people from posting from an entirely different server to your web server. You have to add this into any of the forms that you're going to be created for your form to function. So if you create an HTML form, everything looks fine. When you plug in the information and hit submit, it fails out. Most likely you need to add the CSRF token to make your form work within Django. And then we can scroll down and basically got a lot of the different stuff here. From there, right, we look down here and we have block content and end block. So basically what this means is if this template is being extended by another template, the content will go in this block content. So we go to note-html. So extends main.html, the template that we were just at, block content. So this matches with the block content tags on the main.html template. And then from here, we've got all the basic stuff, right? So if user is authenticated, if search tag, if profile.username, and you just go through and it's, a lot of stuff in here. So basically, this is what the templates look like, and this is what the template language looks like, and it's very important to understand that this is not Python. This is its own template language. So if you get confused, make sure to Google search template, the Django template language, and not necessarily Python in order to solve problems within a template. So now we get to custom filters, right? So filters within the Django world, these are on the templates, and basically what you do is you take the values of a variable and basically you transform them in some way. Maybe you capitalize them, maybe you don't capitalize them, you do some basic kind of stuff. As I've said before, I do believe the people that created Django might be a wee bit passive aggressive. It's just my opinion. I'm just putting it out there. It seems that way. And so one of the issues you run into when you're trying to print out to the template is sometimes things that seem like they should be really, really, really easy to do are not really, really, really easy to do. So one of the things that I ran into personally is when you're sending the variable values to the template, You send them as a query set or you send them as a dictionary. So if you're used to PHP or something else, basically think of them as like an array. The issue is when you get to the template, you can't access a list within a list, or a list within a dictionary, or a dictionary within a dictionary, right? It all comes as one thing. So basically, if we go and we take a look at the template, what we can see is here we have a loop, right? So for x in notes. So in the views file, we queried the note table. We got all of the values from the note table. We then sent all of those values to this template in the notes, basically a query set that gets sent here. So for x in notes, that query set, again, think about it like a dictionary list array, right? Then we can start printing out all of the records, right? X.owner. Right? So basically whatever is in the column of owner, print that out. X.added timestamp, print that out. Here is we have a filter. So added timestamp, filter time since. So when we talk about the filter, what we're talking about here is this, right? So here's the timestamp. Initially what I'm doing is I'm saying print out owner, Eli, print out timestamp, time since. So 1 month ago, and then I'm going to print out the timestamp, right? So that's what a filter looks like here. Then we're going to do the x.added timestamp, so the actual timestamp itself. We're going to print through, and it's going to do that type of thing. So x.url, whatever the URL is we had for a note, that's going to be printed out here. X.memo, so whatever for that particular record, that record is in the memo column will get printed out here, and so on and so forth. The issue you run into, though, is that these are single values that can be printed out. So if we take a look at that note-taking app, we have these tags down here, right? So we print out the title. That seems normal. We print out the user. We print out the timestamp. We print out the URL. We print out the memo, right? So these are all individual variable values. But then we come down here to the tags. So these are the tags, right? And I want to be able to click on these tags so I can see other notes that have that particular tag in them, right? So email, there's 2 notes here. If I click on settings, I have 1 note. If I click on Django, I have lots and lots and lots of notes, right? So that's basically what I'm trying to have here. The issue that you run into is stock standard Django will basically just send these as a comma separated value. You can put tags, so I could do x.tags. And if I put x.tags, it would simply be email, comma, settings, comma, Django, comma, SMTP, comma, iframe, whatever, comma, and that would be it. And it would just be text. There would be no hyperlink. There would be no other thing, right? So you can't just automatically have a list within that query set or other list and be able to access it easily. So that's where you have to have a custom filter, right? So here we can have load note tags. Then I say for y, so basically we're going to be doing a for loop for y in x.tags. So basically the note record that got sent, the tags value in that note record, I am going to send this to a custom filter that I created. So I created this custom filter called note tags. I'm going to send x.tags to this split list filter. If I come here, I can take a look at my very simple split list filter, and all this is going to do is it's simply going to split the comma separated values in that particular variable and turn that into a list so that I can then do a for loop, and so for y in x.tags split list. So I split it out, and then what I can do is I can create all of those different tags with the hyperlinks. And so this I'm actually doing with custom filters. And so this is one of the issues you get into the Django world between the views and the template. Sometimes when you're trying to do what you would consider pretty basic stuff, again, sending a list within a query set or dictionary or whatever else, you might run into these weird problems and you actually have to create a custom filter. That is something that we will teach in the full 8-hour class. Here, I just want to give you that overview so that you have the understanding that you will run into this problem. So now that we've talked about the URLs file and the views file and the templates, let's swing back around to the models file. So the models file is where you're going to be describing the database tables. So if you're used to dealing with MySQL or Postgres or something else, you might be used to simply interacting with the database with SQL. The important thing to understand with Django is that you're not going to be interacting with the database directly with SQL. You're going to be writing basically all of the information for the database into the models file. Then what happens is you're going to run the command python manage make migrations. So what happens with this particular script is it will read the models file, it will grab all of the configurations you've put into the models file, and then it will turn that into the SQL statements that you need. From there, at that point, all you've done is essentially created a file of SQL statements. From there, you do python manage migrate, and then what happens is Django runs those SQL statements that were just created against your database, and now your database has been modified. So this is kind of how this works. One of the warnings that it'll give you when you're dealing with Django is make sure you do the proper planning for your Django web application before you start dumping a lot of data into your Django web application. So again, as I've been playing with this, shockingly, I've made some mistakes. I added columns that I didn't actually need. I needed to add columns that I didn't initially create, the whole 9 yards. One of the weird things though is when you go into troubleshooting, like basically if you want to add a column or you want to remove a column, many times you just change it in the models file, run these scripts, and it works fine. Every once in a while it'll fail out for whatever reason. And so you're like, oh, okay. No big deal. Let me do a Google search. Let me troubleshoot and figure out how I can modify the database. And basically, the instructions are delete your database and start over. So do be careful with that. That's one of the things, like a lot of times, I'm one of those people where I like to start dumping stuff in as I'm building an application. One of the problems you might run into is you dump a lot of data into the Django application that you're creating. You find out you need to do something with the database, and basically the only way to get done what you need done is to delete and recreate the database, and you can run into some problems that way. So do make sure that you've thought out, you've planned out what your database is supposed to look like before you start dumping a lot of information into that. With that, let's go over and actually take a look at the models file so you get a little bit better idea of what I'm talking about. So this is the models file. Again, we start from django.db, import models. Make sure you have the models module installed. It's Python. If you don't, it's not going to work. The first table that we have class note. So we have a table called note, and then under these are all the columns for that note table. So title, right, is a char field, max length of 40. Memo is a char field, max length of 4,000. URL, a char field, max length of 200. Owner, tags, status, I just left these as char fields, and then we have the added timestamp, and this is where you have a date time field, auto now add, so basically whenever you create the note, it auto adds that particular timestamp, and so this is what this table looks like. We would do the make migrations, it would turn this into a SQL statement, then we would run the SQL statement, and then that would create this table and actually put it into the database. Now again, it's important to understand, just simply typing all of this out, this file right here doesn't mean you've modified the database. You have to run those commands that I showed you previously. Then we have down here, we have another table that I created, basically a profile table for additional information for each user. We have a user ID, which is an integer field. We have a bio, we have a social profiles, we have following tags, and these have different lengths here. Now you'll notice this. this, right? Define string self, return self.title, self.status, self.added timestamp, self-owner, and we see the bars here. What this is for right here, is when we go to the admin panel. All right, so we're at the admin panel now, and I click on the notes table in the admin panel. Here's where we get the title, here's where we get the status, here's where we get the timestamp, and here's where we get the owner, right? So that is what shows this, right? So we look at this, title, status, timestamp, owner, and then we come here, title, status, timestamp, owner. So we can actually configure how this looks, which again is important to think about, like with your system administrators, if they're trying to scan through the records within this particular table, what is most important for them. Now what you'll notice is for the profile table, I didn't add this, and so when we go to the profiles table, we just see profile object 8, profile object 7, so on and so forth. We don't get any useful information, so I actually have to click on this, and actually, well, that doesn't give us too much information. Oh, give me something useful here. Anyways, right? So this shows me following Marge, following Tang's Django. So this is the information here, but when I look at the profiles, when I just look here at this, basically this report out, it doesn't actually give me anything useful. So this is something to be thinking about when you're looking at creating your models file. Basically, are you going to be having system administrators interacting with that graphical user interface dashboard? If they are, then think about what information should be printed out within those tables. But this is what the models file looks like, and basically you'll just make it bigger based off of your particular application, but this is what it is. So now let's talk about static files. So when I'm talking about static files, these are most likely going to be images, right? Logos, GIFs, pictures, JPEGs, whatever else, right? You go to a normal website, and if you see an image gallery or anything like that, those are pictures, those are files. So when I showed you this note-taking app, everything that got printed out, that's just text or that's just CSS. There are no other files involved. It's important to understand from a security standpoint that generally you do not want your Django server to be the server that actually presents those files to the end user. So you can use basically a different server. So you can have a file server that's going to have those images and those static files. You can use AWS. You can use some kind of content delivery network, something like that. The reason is that keeps your Django server secure, right? If you have a folder that people are going to access, frankly, you might screw up the permissions on that particular folder, right? You know, it's supposed to only be a read. You're going through, you're doing some administrative tasks, you make it a write, somebody adds something, somebody modifies something, all hell breaks loose because your files are on the same server as your Django server, and maybe a hacker is able to compromise things. What's good for security is if you have your Django server and then all the files are stored on an entirely different server, if somebody is able to compromise that different file server, that's going to be a mess, but it's going to be a contained mess. You don't have to worry about your database being compromised and everything else. You can have your static files hosted on your Django server, but basically that's one of those things, you know, in a lab environment, in a test environment, in a small environment, right? If you just have a little help desk system for your company with like 10 users, that might actually make sense. But generally, you're going to be hosting any kind of static file on an entirely separate server or an entirely separate infrastructure. And then simply within that HTML, within that template, you then just point to that server for that image or whatever to be embedded. So now that you've created your awesome new dog dating app with Django and you're going to take over the world, you're now going to have to deploy your Django app into the production environment. Again, we are not going to be using the web server that you're given by default when you install Django. You're actually going to have to upgrade everything. The web server that you're most likely going to use is something called Gunicorn. I think that's how you pronounce it. Sometimes I hate doing these classes and videos because there's all these weird ass words. So many weird ass words. I never know how to pronounce anything. I think it's called Gunicorn. I don't know that word right there. Unicorn. Anyways, this is a production level Python web server, and this is what you're going to be configuring in order to present Django. Now the thing is, in a production environment, you're going to have lots of users coming to your web application, and when you do that, there's resource management, basically handing in network resources from one user to the other. And so what you're going to want to do is, in front of Gunicorn, you're going to put Nginx. So you're going to use Nginx as something called a reverse proxy server. So people are going to hit Nginx. Nginx is going to do stuff to improve the performance for your users, and then it's going to redirect all of the users to Gunicorn. So Gunicorn is the web server that goes through the reverse proxy server of Nginx that all of your visitors are going to be going through. We will go through all of this when we actually do the class. It's not horrible. It's also not easy enough for me to explain here. One of the things that I will warn you with this whole setup is whenever I'm building these Django applications, most of the time when I'm using Python, right, I've got a metric crap ton of computers around here. I literally have 20 Macs. If you thought I liked Apple before, I have to admit, I have like 20 Macs. We have 15 lab computers here, plus other Mac computers that I use for different things. And so in the Python world, you can do something, you can create what are called virtual environments, basically allow you to sandbox your different Python applications that you're creating so that they can use different modules. The thing is, for me, I don't normally need to do that because I've got 15 other Macs, right? I can set this little Python server up and another Python server up and another Python server up and another Python server up, so I don't normally have to use virtual environments. One of the things that I'll tell you with this whole Gunicorn and Nginx thing is when you go through and you're trying to set this up, there's going to be one step where everybody tells you this configuration file that you have to write, and it will fail. If you're not using a virtual environment, it will fail. It will not tell you why it's failing. It will just continuously fail. Where you get into the weird little world is basically there's one line and you have to remove one folder essentially in this URL path. And if you remove that one folder, everything works like a champ. Just pointing that out. If you run into this, if you're trying to put this into a production environment, again, the documentation for Django is shockingly bad. So just kind of keep that in mind if everything is breaking. You might like literally, there might be like one little path thing that you have to change. But anyways, you just kind of have to keep this in mind. So you're going to be using Nginx and you're going to be using Gunicorn in order to deploy your Django web application up onto DigitalOcean or Linode or AWS or wherever you're going to be deploying it. Warning, Will Robinson. A warning. I will warn you. You can break Django Security. And I know, because I did it quite a bit. Here's the thing. If you build your Django web app the way that the creators of Django want you to build a web app, you should be pretty secure. Again, you do have to think about things and you can't be stupid. But if you build it how you're supposed to build it, you should be fine. If you're still learning Django and you're not really sure how it's all supposed to work, and so you're just building crap the way you think it should be built, you can break the hell out of Django in the blink of an eye, right? So the whole custom filter thing, right? So that custom filter thing that I showed you for those tags, when I was trying to figure out how to do it, initially I couldn't figure out how to do it, and I didn't understand the custom filters. So one of the things that I did is I actually had a function within the views file that I showed you that took all of the values, all the tag values, right, in that field, and basically turned them into hyperlinks within the views file. So basically, the tags field got sent to a function, basically turned all the values in the tags field into list values separated by commas, right? So that they were then lists. And then what I did was I then wrote all of those tag values back into a string, basically encapsulated within hrefs. encapsulated within hyperlinks. And then that all got sent to the template, and the template printed it all out, and it looked pretty. It was like, okay, there we go. I got the title, I got the user account, I got the timestamps, I got the URL, I got the memo, and I got my hyperlink tags. Here was the issue. When I did that, one of the ways you could break my web application is if you opened an HTML tag and then didn't close it. Right? So let's say you created a tag, and the tag that you created was the opening of an HTML tag. Right? So basically, since I was kind of going around how Django wants you to do things, that didn't get sanitized out, that didn't get turned into text. It still remained a HTML tag. And so when it got printed out into that big old notes list, many times it would break the notes list. So it wasn't really a true SQL injection attack. You weren't able to compromise the server, but you were able to break the server. That was one of the things that I did. There are many, many, many other things that I did to break Django. So one of the important things to understand about Django is you can do something asininely wrong that looks good to the end user and is absolutely miserable for security. So whenever you're designing anything for Django, once you get done, right? You know what I'm saying? You sit there, you take a day or two, you're coding something out, it works, you're sitting back like, yeah, I built that. As you're sitting back, what I want you to ask yourself is, does it seem like Django should work this way? Yes, what you did is functioning, but does it feel like this is how Django is supposed to work? And if the answer is no, it means you probably need to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to do it properly, right? So that's just one of those big things to consider. This is also, too, if you are going to be taking over a legacy Django web application. Because, let's be honest here, not all IT professionals are actually good at their job. Right? So a lot of IT professionals duct tape crap and then say the day is done. So one of the things, if you're coming in behind somebody else as an administrator, one of the things you might want to do is go through and audit all that code to verify that what is happening within that Django web application is actually being done the way it's supposed to be done. Or again, you may have a hell of a lot of vulnerabilities and security issues that literally just don't need to be there as long as you build the Django web application the correct way. So now that you're all excited and happy about Django, because I gotta say, I like Django. I like Django. It's the documentation that annoys the hell out of me. So now that you're sitting there and you're thinking, yeah, I really want to learn Django, where do you go from here? Well, the first thing that I'll say is, again, no, seriously, the creators of Django are passive-aggressive asshats, and their tutorials are miserable. Miserable. I've been doing tech since 1996, and I'm not sure I've ever seen tutorials quite so bad and the way that they do things. So do be careful with that. If you're going to go learn Django and it seems really complicated, you don't understand what's going on, just understand it might be, truly might be the issue of the tutorial itself. W3 Schools, again, I can't say enough about W3 Schools. They're an absolutely awesome resource, w3schools.com. They actually have a whole bunch of lessons on Django, so that might be a useful way to go. And of course, Silicon Dojo, we are going to be having an 8-hour class on Django sometime in the future, and again, I will try to walk you through how to build a Django web application in a way that doesn't make you want to lose your mind. But again, if you're going to go out there and just learn Django, one of the things you may just want to do is just take the time to try to find tutorials or whatever else that makes sense to you. And if something doesn't make sense, try to break down the problems that you're trying to solve and go from there. Like that was a big thing. Again, truly, with the Django tutorials from Django's site. Miserable, right? So I spent a day trying to go through the tutorial. It was a mess. It was a horrible, evil, just mess. It was just garbage, right? And so literally, once I got done with this garbage and I don't know what to do, the first thing that I did was like, okay, so we have view. So I was like, okay, so we have URL. So I knew how to build an app. I knew how to set up the app. And I understood that the URLs directed to the views, and then the views then directed the user to wherever they're supposed to go. So literally what I did is I just sat back, I thought about it, and it's like, okay, I need to make sure I understand how this progression works. So I said to myself, what I want to do is I want to redirect, when I go to 127.0.0.1, I want to redirect to CNN.com. Right? That's simple. I'm not actually pulling from the database. I'm not getting SQL or set queries or doing any of that. I just want to go to 127.0.0.1 and I want to redirect to CNN.com, and that will show me that basically that the URLs is working properly. And so what I did is I went to URLs, and again, I put basically nothing there, so nothing, and go to views, and then I said like basic or .basic as some function. And then I went to the views file, and I was like, okay, what do I do? And so I had to add the redirect module. So you add the redirect module, and I created like definition, so a basic function. And then there, basically all I did is I wrote the code to redirect the user to CNN.com. And then I did all of that, and I typed in 127.0.0, then I made the server run, and I did 127.0.0.1, and then I redirected to CNN.com. And I was like, okay. So now the web server is working, the URLs file is working, and views is doing something. It's redirecting me to CNN.com. And then so once I had that, then I started building up to understand, okay, now that I have that, let me create a template file, and then within views, let me create a couple of variables and values for the variables, and simply send those variable values to the template. So create a variable called hello with a string of hello world, send hello to the template, have the template print out the value of hello, I get hello world. Okay, now I'm going from the URLs to the views. I'm creating a variable in views. I'm assigning a value to the variable in views. I am sending that to the template, and I'm printing that out on the template. And then you slowly build up your knowledge base on how this crap works. So anyways, that's how you go about trying to learn Django if you're not going to be coming to our class. And so finally, we are done with this Django introduction seminar, and what I want to tell you is please steal this presentation. As I talked about in the beginning, Silicon Dojo is authorityless, gatekeeperless, free to the Indies, or hands-on technology education that empowers you to do whatever the hell it is that you want to do. And the way that I want Silicon Dojo to scale is I want people to take the education that I've created and start presenting this education into whatever environment they're at, right? So again, I've been on YouTube since 2009, and I have had countless people come up to me, people from Pakistan, people from India, people from different places in Africa, and they've said to me, Eli, thank you for the technology education that you have created. Your education allowed me to get better or to understand technology, and now I'm at university, or now I work for Cisco, or now I do this or that or the other thing. When I look at what I want to do for the next decade, and I think about the goal of what I want for Silicon Dojo, my goal for Silicon Dojo is somebody to come to me and say, I'm from Mogadishu, and I was learning, Django or Python or whatever else from my instructor, and my instructor got his material or whatever else from you. I was learning using the Dojo methodology or whatever else in Uzbekistan or wherever the hell it is that you may be. So basically, this presentation and almost all presentations are going to be on GitHub or some other platform as time goes by. There will be a link down below where you'll be able to download the keynote presentation for yourself, and from there you can use it as it is, you can modify it. You can change different things, or you can just take the concept of what I'm trying to do here to create education for your environment. Again, if you're in a particular area, and, you want to teach a church group or a Cub Scout group, or again, you're in India or you're in Africa or you're in Europe, you like this idea and you want to replicate this wherever you are at. One of the key things that I'm trying to do here is trying to create a system that is replicatable so that you can take this to wherever you are and you can start supporting the people that you care about. So please steal this presentation and most things that I do. Just, if you do, tell people where you got it from. Tell people where you got it from. So anyways, as always, I enjoyed teaching this particular seminar, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one, whether it's here, on a video environment, or hopefully you'll be somebody that actually comes here to our in-person environment here in Asheville, North Carolina, and you can actually learn this material with fellow students and get the whole experience of actually being able to learn technology information with other students. So with that, look forward to seeing you next time.